Welcome to today's Harvard Data Science Initiative Industry Seminar. I'm Jen Chow. I'm Director of External Engagement here at the HDSI. Today, we're pleased to introduce Tammy Levy from Captain TV, a startup pioneering streamer-led multiplayer community games. Tammy has a background in computer science and over 10 years experience in the gaming industry, including stints at EA, Zynga, and Congregate. So before I turn things over to Tammy, I wanted to mention that we'll be using the Zoom Q&A function. So please post questions there. Ask early and ask often. We'll have time for Q&A after Tammy's talk. Okay, so with that, I'll turn it over to Tammy. Welcome.
Thank you for that lovely intro. I see that some people will continue to roll in. I'll start with a brief intro as people kind of keep joining the webinar, but I'm very excited to be here today and be talking about economic principles in video games. So after that intro, I don't need to reintroduce myself again. What are we talking about today? So today, what I want to do is first give a quick intro and start and warm us up with what the game industry looks like today. After that, I'll dive into a specific segment of the gaming industry, which is free-to-play games. And from there, we'll do a deep dive on games as economies, which is really the meat of today's webinar. So to warm us up, I usually I like to ask people whether they consider themselves gamers. And, if we were in a room, I would probably see a couple hands go up here and there, but usually not the whole room. And that is because we certainly have kind of this stereotype of what a gamer is. It's a very niche market, just very passionate folks that maybe you're playing games since they're kids or, doing these LAN parties. But, really, if I show you this screen, there's so many types of games out there in today's world, from solitaire, that's a video game. Recently Wordle became very popular. Word game, that is a game. Or even kind of in the early days of phone games before smartphones, we had the snake game on the Nokia. Very old school Tetris. All of these are games. So when I ask people, do you play video games? And we start talking about like what are video games? A lot more people raise their hand because video games come in all shapes and forms. And really, part of it is that gaming is everywhere. There was recently a post from the Washington Post where they pulled some data, and really we're now seeing over 200 million Americans of all ages, races, and genders play video games. So maybe we're not identifying ourselves as gamers, but we're still playing games. So putting that into numbers, the video game industry is a huge industry. It definitely saw a boom during the pandemic, but even as it slowed down coming out of lockdowns and the pandemic, kind of at the peak, we still have forecasting a continued growth year over year. We see these days about 3.2 billion players globally, so 3.2 billion people playing games every day. Over close to $200 billion in revenue is forecasted for 2022 across the industry. And thousands of games are released every year. So in the last 12 months, we see close to 20,000 games having been released. So, there's a lot of opportunity when you see the numbers of players and revenue being generated in the game industry. But there's also competition with all of these games coming out every day, every week, every year. The competition is fierce. And what that means is that we need to think about making good games, not only hey, games are now easy to build, and there's an audience for them, but the games have to be good. The games have to be fun for players to want to continue to play the games, invest in the games, and stay with you as a player for the long run. And part of kind of that idea of games need to be good is, video games are native digital products. With this idea of, a digital product with millions of players, we actually have a huge opportunity of being smarter through data. So data really is at the core of the game industry and how the game operates. The opportunity of being smarter through data means that there's in every team a data science team, however big or small it might be. It might be one data analyst, it might be a huge team of data scientists. So some of the data use cases for how we leverage data in the games industry is from game design, game monetization, what we call matchmaking, fraud detection, presenting personalized offers to players, marketing optimizations, kind of looking a little bit outside of just the game, audience analysis, and many more. Really, a lot of these are, exist in a lot of digital products, but game design, game monetization, and matchmaking are really quite interesting and unique use cases within the games industry. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about today really leverages the first two, and it's thinking about game design and game monetization. All right, so back to our revenue, that big number of 200, close to 200 billion estimated in revenue for the year. If we slice it a little bit further into business models, one thing that really has happened is that there's this business model called free to play, where 20 years ago, it was the ugly duckling of the gaming industry. Now it's the dominating business model. This is where really all of my experience comes from, and the principles that I am presenting today are very much from the lens of free-to-play games, even though they are applied as well to other types of games and business models. All right, with that intro, we can start talking about free-to-play games and what they are. So I have a little note there that if you see any of my slides calling F2P games, it's the same thing. We tend to abbreviate it in that way. All right, so the free-to-play business model, what does it look like? It is, as the name says, free-to-play. What that means is that the game is free. It has very low friction, and it allows us to attract millions of players. Literally millions of players are playing a single free-to-play game on a daily basis. From there, we need to make sure that we engage and retain the player. So it's not only important that we bring in the player into the game, but that we design the game so that players can play for days, weeks, months, and years to come. Some of the most successful mobile games today have been around for now over 10 years. A lot of them are kind of reaching these milestones of their 10-year anniversary and have players that have been with them for all of those 10 years. And finally, on the monetization side, at the end of the day, we are building a business. As an industry, we need to, we have teams, we need to be profitable. So which means that we need to monetize the games in some way. So if they are free to come in first, we can still generate very meaningful revenue if even a small percentage of players ends up spending throughout their lifetime in the game. Generally speaking, we see that most games fall in this 1 to 5% of players spending. All right, so now digging one layer deeper, some of the characteristics from our free-to-play games are, when we think about this idea of free, they're free up front. Just recapping, revenue comes from in-game purchases, formerly or initially called microtransactions. We no longer use that terminology because they're really not that small of transactions at times when you have players spending $100 on a bundle at times. And one key characteristic is that they do not have an ending. So it's not this storyline that you're completing from start to finish as a game, but it's a game that you continue to play, as I said, for years. How do we achieve that? Through something that we call live operations, which means that we're regularly updating and releasing the game. That keeps the game feeling fresh, interesting for players. And to be able to do that, we rely on a lot of data to understand what are players liking, what are players not liking, what is working, are parts of the game that are not quite doing well, and how do we address those? But going back to the idea of free games, there's always a question, if a product is free, can it be a sustainable business? So how do we unpack that question? We can start by first thinking about, it will take some effort, whether it's monetary or otherwise, to bring in players into your game, and we can call that our acquisition cost. And basic formula is that we need the player value, effectively the revenue that we generate on a per player basis, to be bigger than that acquisition cost. So how do we achieve that? We need to make sure that they continue to play, so that they spend a lot of time in the game. And that as they're spending time in the game, it means that they're enjoying the game. And when we present opportunities to spend in the game, players will have this high desire to spend. And really having that enjoyment and opportunities to spend can be a very tricky balance. But if we can achieve that, then we can build a sustainable business where we effectively maximize the player lifetime value, or what we abbreviate as LTV, effectively the player value, and being greater than that acquisition cost. That is just kind of how we talk about it in the industry in general. But going back to this idea of a tricky balance, if you think about it, there is this push and pull between player enjoyment and generating revenue for the team. The reason for that is because creating those opportunities to spend, if not done in a thoughtful way, in a very well designed way, can create undesirable friction for the player in a way that they stop enjoying the game and eventually stop playing the game. And this is quite unique to games and free-to-play games. And it's very different from other business models, such as premium games. So kind of the idea of this box game that I go maybe to a store now on Amazon and I pay upfront. Why? Because there's an upfront investment. I paid first, then I play it. And even as a consumer, I know that there's this fixed price that I have paid for that game. So it's a very different challenge for the developers to entertain their audience, because that dynamic is different. It is also different from e-commerce. Maybe it's a little bit closer, but it's not quite. Why? Because a user's main motivation when they go to shop online is to spend. They are exchanging money for goods or services. So their motivation is not to have fun. It's not to be enjoyed. Maybe whatever they acquire will result in that, but they are there to spend as their primary motivation. And subscriptions. So subscriptions, they're also kind of a little bit closer because you have kind of this recurring spend, but they're not as interactive in that, you're presenting content to the user, but they don't really expect to have this progression and journey through, how we see it in games. They don't expect to be challenged in the same way as we, have to always keep in mind for a game. And even when you have a subscription, when you're presenting a sample or a trial, the expectation is very clear from the user's perspective, and they have these recurring payments happen on kind of set intervals. So it's not kind of this ebb and flow where I could be spending at any time, but I have this product or service for free. So if you've noticed, I've kind of talked about a few pieces of kind of a journey and process and experience. And really, the truth is that fun is a journey. It is a process. It's an experience. So the way that this kind of this balance between enjoyment and challenge looks like for the player is, they come in and they're having fun, they're happy. We present a challenge which gets the player thinking, and then they maybe go through this journey of problem solving and thinking, and finally they get this enjoyment moment, this high again from solving that problem. And that really encapsulates what fun is and the experience that we're trying to provide to players, as we talk about an enjoyable experience. On the other hand, how can we provide that as game developers? So this is what it looks like from the game developer side. It's a lot of design and flows and charts and spreadsheets, and just a very careful balance on our part, and a very thoughtful balance on our part. So at the end of the day, we're in a pursuit of balance. So to boil it down, successful free-to-play games really achieve this balance by following a very simple strategy, which is designing their games as living, breathing economies, which is a very interesting way of thinking about game design, because it kind of changes, it tries and turns the game into this system. And the reason this is, leads to success is because with a good economy, we can actually win on kind of both sides of that balance, where a good economy is a revenue driver, as well as it creates an engaging experience that has longevity for the player. And I will dive right into why that is the case. So, games as economies, and the principles that we use behind designing a game economy. Let's start with some definitions that we are going to explore further, but we're going to need as we start talking about this. So economy design kind of in a simple definition, is the crafting of game systems and balancing in-game assets that integrates them well into the game core loop. So there's a couple of concepts here that I just also introduced. One is the in-game assets. So as the player engages in the game, they tend to gain and consume in-game assets. And I'll continue to explore this concept further as we go. And the game core loop is what it creates a sense of progression and gives player kind of this journey and the compelling reason to continue to play. Again, I'll dive into the core loop piece a little bit later. But first, let's peel back the layers. Let's think about, what does it mean to build a game economy? What are the building blocks, so to speak, of free-to-play game design that leads them to be very interesting economies in our virtual worlds? First, the first part of that layer is the moment to moment. That's what we call the moment to moment gameplay. It's the action that players are taking. It's the main mechanic or mechanics that players are experiencing in the moment. It's kind of those micro goals in a session that a player is experiencing. It defines individual play sessions. For example, in what we call a match 3 game like Candy Crush, which I'll come back to as an example. Matching candy, that's the moment-to-moment gameplay. It's solving that puzzle. And it tends to be defining the genre and type of game. It's the core mechanic that sets that foundation. So when you see someone's screen of a game that they're playing, you very quickly get the type of game, and it sets some expectations of what that experience is going to be like. Next up, we have aspiration. So those are the macro goals, the long-term goals that the game is setting for the player. Sometimes they're also player devised, but it's kind of that road that I'm or kind of like those milestones that I'm working towards. And since as I mentioned earlier, free-to-play games have no end. We have to make sure that we're always setting kind of goals that present a compelling future to work for, something to work towards and continue to play, work in air quotes, but also has to be achievable. They can't be too spaced out or too hard or out of reach. If they're incredibly difficult, that is also when players are going to start feeling kind of like this hopelessness and eventually quit the game. Next layer that we add onto it is the progression. So, I have this moment-to-moment gameplay, and then I have this long-term aspiration. Well, I need to get there. There's going to be even smaller steps and gains that I take to get from that moment where I'm at today to that aspiration, that bigger goal that I have. So it's that path that players are taking to get from that current state to that big goal. And there's different types of progressions that we can kind of provide as experiences for players. One can be content driven. This is usually what most free-to-play games rely on. That would be completing from as simple as completing levels, collecting stars, upgrades, even unlocking new stories that a player can complete, that will, basically you're feeling that they're moving forward in the game. On the other hand, there's also skill-based, which is much more about the player's spending time, mastering whether it's a mechanic, a move, or something in the game as they play the game over and over again. They are the ones kind of developing that skill by spending that time. And the last layer of kind of these concentric circles, or this onion, as we're building our economy, is the assets, or the tools that we're giving players to be able to progress through the game. So there's dozens, even maybe hundreds of categories at this point that game developers have defined as currencies and resources. But there's really kind of two big buckets that I want to highlight. One is currencies, and those are kind of a very easy real world analog for players, where it's just assets in the game that I can exchange for other items that have a more specific use. And resources, which is, they have additional layers of complexity or function. Sometimes they could even be just purely cosmetic, but their primary use is not to buy other stuff. And there's actually one more asset that I want to call out, which is time. And that is, a player's time is probably the most valuable resource that we have. When we have their time and attention, we have to treat it with care. And that is part of creating this journey and this progression for the player. One quick note as well on currencies. I mentioned that it's kind of that in-game money. So I wanted to go through a little bit of a more specific example here, because it really ties kind of all of the idea of the game economy together. So the reason we come up with in-game currencies is to keep players engaged in the game without worrying about the real world value or cost of resources in game. There's two primary categories of currencies that we use in games. What we call soft currency, it's usually earned mainly through gameplay. It's very thematic. These tend to be very thematic to the games. Coins tend to also be a default for a lot of games or something that ties better with the theme of the game. And we have also premium currencies, sometimes earned through gameplay, but primarily available for purchase with real world money. So to give you an example, if I have real world money somewhere in a bank. This is an example from a game called Clash Royale. So $5 will give me 500 gems. That is my premium currency. And now I'm in the in-game money and in the in-game currency, and this allows me to purchase a bunch of other things. For now, I went through the flow of, okay, let's convert these gems into gold, or those coins. So these gems that I just acquired, these 500 gems, give me a bucket of gold, which is 10,000 coins. And from there, now I can do even a lot more with that in-game money. For example, I can buy some very cool epic guards for 2,000 coins each. So that kind of gives you an example of how very quickly once you've made that transaction and spend your real money into the game, then you're in the game ecosystem. And finally, the way that we really think about our economy is a flow of resources, and really being able to have a balanced flow of resources. And we actually, because in the games industry, we like to come up with fun analogies for almost everything that we do. We usually talk about it very much as a sink. And our main goal, again, is to achieve a balanced flow where our resource would be the water flowing. Generally speaking, it's more of like our currencies and kind of our resources in the game. And we have all the same elements as this picture has, where we need to really, main goal is stability. We achieve that by controlling how our resources flow. Our sources are where those resources come from. So you can see I have my source there at the faucet. Sometimes it's called a tab or a faucet. It's more easy to just call it sources. This is where players get those resources from. Then we have our sinks over here, which is where players spend their currency. Right there. And finally, we get our levers, which are the control mechanisms that really allow us to maintain kind of that resource stability. And this is really important because as a sink, if the tap or the source is releasing too much currency, we'll have overflow. Our economy will literally be flooded. If our tap is not releasing enough, then there's no reason to engage, because I'm like pulling from the game almost, like, come on, give me more. And similarly, we have to control the things, how we're draining those assets or resources from the players. And the ultimate goal here is for us to have kind of this balanced wallet for the players at any given time. And I will dig into this a little bit more as well. But first, I mentioned that I was going to bring up the Candy Crush example again. For those that are not familiar with Candy Crush, it's a very popular game, mobile game that came out, I think, over 10 years ago now. It has a simple puzzle mechanic where you have to match 3 of the same candy. That breaks the candy. You have to clear a puzzle or a board. And that's how that's the main kind of intent of the game. So let's translate kind of everything I just went through of those layers of those concentric circles into how it works in an actual game like Candy Crush. So as I mentioned, the moment to moment is matching those candies. So in this case, person is trying to match the blue candy in this row. The aspiration are these milestones that you're kind of going after. And there's both individual milestones, like I, as a person, want to reach a level 3000. It can be even a smaller milestone of, hey, I want to get 3 stars on that level. There's also social milestones, which is all about competing against others. I want to get higher score than my friends. And this is something that they've introduced more and more, is just having kind of these moments of competition that gives you kind of an aspiration of kind of through our competitive nature. In terms of those aspirations and those goals, you can also just, as I was talking about it, can hear that there's a little bit of both intrinsic and extrinsic aspirations for a player. Intrinsic are things that I could be setting for myself. So maybe I don't care to get all 3 stars on all levels. I can just complete them and I am happy with that and just keep moving. Someone who's more ambitious, maybe they set their own goal of, no, I want to get, if I clear a level, I have to clear it with 3 stars. If not, I'm going to keep playing that level until I clear it with 3 stars. And then we have extrinsic, which is all the motivations that kind of all these milestones and goals that the game presents to you, kind of just happen to you as a player. The progression is this saga map that the Candy Crush launched with, which was really the innovation, because it was a very, the matching mechanic, the puzzle was not something new. It was something we already had in games, but presenting kind of how I progressed through those levels in this form was pretty simple, clear, yet innovative, because it clearly laid out that road for the player. In terms of assets, there's all sorts of consumables in Candy Crush. From your player level, you could consider, you're getting experience points, you can consider that an asset. You have lives, so you can only try so many times on a given period of time. You have power-ups that you can spend to help you complete a level. You have gold that can help you, buy power-ups, etc., etc. And then the balance. How do they achieve balance in their case? So it's a little bit different from what I mentioned of kind of the things. It doesn't flow quite as well with that analogy. They do it more from the level difficulty. But it's kind of like a similar idea of like they have these control points where they have some levels that are very hard. Here in the y-axis you have lose rate, so you can see that there's some levels, like this is just an example of how you would balance the difficulty of a game like this, where you have some levels that are very, very hard. They're nightmarish levels, as you can see, and it takes a lot of time and effort for players to complete them. All right, so now that we've kind of gone through those layers and kind of gone one by one, we can revisit our definition of economy design to enhance it a little bit. So economy design really is crafting this balance in keeping a balance of the supply and demand of resources in the game. It's creating some intentional bottlenecks, or what we call pinch points. And then the player needs to resolve these pinch points by engaging, and this is why it can be a good experience, because they have to problem solve and sometimes grind, so just play more, or monetize by spending money. They can maybe fast forward through or skip that bottleneck altogether. So back to our experience of fun. We kind of had talked about this process and this journey for the player. So how do we craft that experience of fun with this idea of kind of these pinch points or bottlenecks? So again, it's a careful balance of challenge, progression, and how much pressure the bottleneck puts in what is the cost to resolve it. So here's an example, just theoretically speaking. On the y-axis we have the challenge or pinch, and like the cost, basically highest cost to resolve, and the highest challenge would be up here, and progression over time for the player. So if we hit kind of this very high cost or very high challenge, that's player frustration zone. We want to stay away from it. If we don't present any challenge to the player, then we get player boredom zone. That is also not great. There's kind of this in between where it's a little bit interesting for the player, but not enough to either keep them engaged super long term or really kind of presenting these opportunities for monetizing, which is what I call the unprofitable game zone, where you have players engaged, but it's still not, the business is not healthy for the developer. And then we have the happy zone. The happy zone is where we can find kind of this journey of a little bit more challenge, some relief, challenge relief over time that is fun for the players and is profitable for the developers. And how we tie all of this, I had mentioned the game core loop, this idea of a game core loop, is this is how we tie it all together. It's a repeatable cycle for the player, repeatable and controlled cycle that has 3 simple key elements. There is an action that a player takes. They earn and collect assets, rewards, etc. And with that, they can expand, upgrade, get better, and they go back into their actions, rewards, expansion. I'm going to quickly put this into a simple example. It's one that I love because it's a simple farm game. These games got popularized from the Zynga days on Facebook games with Farmville. Heyday was the first game to go on mobile, so it had a very known kind of intent and mechanic. And you should be able to understand kind of how the economy flows for a game like Heyday, even if you're not familiar with it. So it's simple at the surface, but very deep and complex. And it's a masterful example of how games are economies. So let's go quickly through our core loop. The action for the player is to produce goods. So they're producing crops, animal goods, crafted goods. By crafted goods, I mean things like bread and pies. Then they earn and collect coins. So they collect coins, earn XP points by selling those goods. So they send them off and they get coins and XP points, experience points. And then they expand. So they use kind of that those coins that they collected to buy more plots, animals, crafting buildings, upgrade what they already have, expand their farm, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a cycle that repeats itself over and over again. In terms of the economy elements, I mentioned some pieces here with what are the assets that the player has or currencies. So they have coins as the main soft currency, diamonds as their premium currency, experience points, which are it's also an asset, but it's also a good progress marker for kind of like those micro progression moments, and resources, which is everything that the player is generating, those crops, animal goods, crafted goods. And then we have our bottleneck levers. We have, if they have resources, they have to store them somewhere. So there's a storage component there. If they have buildings for, generating their goods, they are represented in a physical board or quote unquote physical board. So there's a space component there. They have to be able to place them. We can use player level to control what players have access to. And we have timers. That is actually our most valuable control in almost any type of game. And that is because player time is the most valuable resource. So, it's very important that we use it a lot, but it's very important that we use it very carefully. So how does the economy flow once we've introduced all of these elements? So at every step, we have inflow and outflow, sinks and sources for coins, XP, and there's time spent there. Similarly here, and similarly on the expand side, we spend our coins to be able to upgrade. But it's a very multi-layered economy, and I love the example on showing how much building from this simple core loop, players and developers are managing a very complex economy. And since Thanksgiving is coming up, let's quickly craft a pie on Heyday. So let's craft a pumpkin pie. We're gonna need a pie oven, and once we put our things in the pie oven, our ingredients, it's gonna take 2 hours. So there is a time component. All right, but what ingredients do we need? We need pumpkins. Okay, pumpkins take 3 hours to craft, to grow. We need wheat, which takes 2 minutes to grow. Cool, that one's quick. And we need eggs. Of course, we need eggs for pies, I think. How do we make eggs? Well, chickens lay eggs. So it takes 20 minutes for a chicken to lay an egg, but for a chicken to lay an egg, we have to feed them. And to feed them, we need to craft their feed, which takes 5 minutes. What does a chicken feed take? Apparently wheat and corn takes another 5 minutes to craft. So as you can tell, it's a multi-layered economy. Whew. All right, so we have 12 minutes left. So I'm gonna go through some of these fairly quickly. But there are a couple of pieces that I want to kind of tie back to that I think very important. And by couple, I mean 3 principles of good game design economy, game economy design. And these are the same principles that we use in economics in the real world. Currency stability. We have to control and monitor the rate of supply and expenditure. So, we've really talked about this a lot, where we have to implement kind of mechanisms to drain any currency surplus and think about a bunch of other ramifications of kind of having that managing the currency. But what is really key here is that we need to make sure that we keep our currency within certain bounds. Price rationality. We need to make sure that the price of things in the game makes sense to players for what they're getting. So whether they spend time working for it or spend money to get it, if something is very expensive, it has to be very valuable for players and for the game. And if it's not valuable, it should be very cheap. And proper allocation. We need to design a system that is fair and it has equality of opportunity and return. That means that highly valuable items should only be acquired by players who've really worked to earn them, whether it's skill through skill, time, or effort. In terms of opportunity, equality of opportunity, we need to make sure that everyone starts with the same resources or equivalent resources. And as I mentioned, the return is same for the same level of effort. So how do we keep our currency stable, or what does it look like to have a healthy currency? So one of the things that we do to prevent currency instability is by having big sync moments for the player, where they can spend a lot of their, whether it's their coins, their, or whatever resource that we're talking about, at strategic moments, so that it actually feels good. It feels like an achievement for the player. So as players progress, they save up, and then they have like these big spend moments that happen at points of achievement. By doing that proper kind of balance, players both celebrate because they achieved something, they feel rewarded by, you know, they by what they got back, and then they're ready for the next challenge. So we try to keep a steady inflow of currency. We have those strategic spend moments, and with that, we're able to kind of find this healthy range for our currency, to prevent instability. Unfortunately, like in the real world, instability happens, and it's something that we're always thinking about, that I thought it'd be fun to mention, which is we have to, like in the real world, manage and prevent inflation. It is actually more susceptible, game economies are more susceptible to sudden inflow of currency, which means that they're more susceptible to inflation, because there's no central control, whether it's a bank, a government, and it can happen that the teams don't monitor and manage their economy, and you just get these sudden inflows. It can also happen because players are very smart, and they seek to always maximize quote unquote mint resources, and find exploits. And once they find it, if you don't notice it right away, they're just going to print money, and you're going to end up with hyperinflation. It can also happen from the developer side, where we introduce new content or run sales without the proper syncs or balance. I've had experiences like that, where it can basically ruin a game. And it does. Unintentional inflation can have, you know, the whole game collapse, because the economy problems erode the trust from the players. There's also this perception of, you know, lack of fairness, or the game becomes boring because I have so much stuff and I don't know what to do with it. But not all inflation is bad. There's actually benefits in being intentional about inflation, and there's some types of games that do this, where they create it as a positive experience. So as you progress, you increase your rate of production, and then what the game does is that they build the things that increase accordingly. And you also kind of, as an added control, you can also increase the effort. So what ends up happening is that you shift the pinch point forward for the player as they're getting through those milestones. So very quick, and I think I'll wrap up at this point after this point, just for Q&A. Sometimes what we do is we inflate the sources. So in this example, it's a game where the point is just to make more. So let's say you have a lemonade stand that is generating coins at a rate. So as you upgrade it, you generate coins kind of at a much faster rate. You feel good because you're, you know, making smart choices about how you're upgrading your building. But then we need to, you know, increase how much it costs here in the blue line to upgrade proportionally to keep up with that rate of increased production. So that is a good one's first step. But even better is also increasing proportionally the effort it takes, in this case, time, to be able to upgrade to the next level. So with those two control points, we end up creating a much more manageable economy that also feels good for a player. All right, I was going to go through pricing, but we are out of time. So Blitz, games are monopolies. Concept number one. Concept number two, virtual currencies are mostly inelastic. Here's an example from an analysis that I ran a few years ago, where we lowered the price point, purchase went up, but not enough to compensate for the price drop. Ultimately, revenue dropped for the game to much lower baseline. Games are kind of messy ecosystems, so we can't pinpoint it to exactly 100% say yes, this virtual currency behaves as an inelastic good, but very strong signs that that is the case. And the third piece that we always have to keep in mind is price anchoring. We do know that players very much react to this, where the initial price presented will influence their decisions for the future. Most players tend to spend at a lower price point for their second purchase. In repeat purchase rates, so having a low initial price point does not increase whether a player is going to do a second or subsequent purchase. So these are also concepts that, as we're kind of tying it all together, from how we build the economy to how we present it to a player, to how we price it in to real money, real dollars, that we have to keep in mind. All right. Thank you very much.
There's actually a number of really interesting questions in here. I like this one. Do games that share the same engine see much different outcomes in engagement? And what variables do you think might lead to any difference? So,
that is a great question. I love it. Yeah. So do games that share the same engine see different outcomes in engagement? Yes. That tends to happen very, very often. What variables might lead to that difference? It hits a ton of different variables from the, let's start from the ground up. So let's say that you have, the exact same game engine, and you just release another game with a different theme. The theme can impact, the art style can impact how the game does. If you make any changes to how the economy works, that will certainly have an impact. The reason the theme and the art style have an impact is because they will attract a different audience, and different players might have different expectations on what the game is about. So that will have an impact, of course, in how the game does. If you make, as I said, any changes to the economy, that will have an impact. Competition, if there's other, you could be competing against yourself, you could be competing against other games where maybe you attract a smaller audience, a different audience. The cost to acquire players might be different from game to game, again, for a variety of variables, including the theme, the art style, putting a different pressure on your kind of that balance of acquisition cost versus value from the player. And then there's the ecosystem that you launch the game in. If you are using the same engine but launching a game a year later, you're looking at a different game ecosystem. So that even in itself could be a huge variable on whether your game does well or not.
It's really interesting. I mean, you can sort of start from the same basics, and they're really different products when you at the end of the day. There's a couple questions in here about free to play versus premium games, and so one question that I had was, is there what difference in lifetime value of a player do studios see between the two? And then there are a couple questions here about whether or not there's a trend toward one or the other at this point.
Free-to-play games are definitely more popular than premium games. And the reason being, it is incredibly low friction to start a game. So back to the idea of like gamers, someone that doesn't consider themselves a gamer might not even try a premium game that is perfect for them and that they would love, unless maybe someone recommends it to them, or there's kind of this extra effort to get someone to try a game. So free-to-play games, people just jump in and try them. From there, so you're attracting a much bigger audience, which also means that you can have a lifetime value on a per player basis that is lower, just because it's a numbers game, it's a volumes game. So you can, think about, if only 5% of my players spend, but they spend a significant amount, it's still, it can still provide a good experience for, the rest of the other 95% of players. Let's see, let me just think through your question a little bit more. Yeah, so friction as an entry point is huge when you're asking 100% of people to spend even $1 or $2, versus you're asking them for $0 but some of their time and attention. There's expectations, unfortunately, for the more casual games. They're so prevalent these days as free-to-play games that even when you have a really good premium, like paid game, most players have an alternative that is free, at least to start. So they'll go to the free alternative versus the paid alternative, just because we have so much presented to us as consumers.
It's parallel to sort of any decision you're making these days in digital environments, I suppose. Okay, last question. This is a little bit more about the economics specifically. Is the unprofitable game zone vague enough to accommodate for all player demographics? For instance, if it's a free game but with paid add-ons, are lower income players and higher income players combined to make the unprofitable game zone? So I guess it's a question of, how do you design the unprofitable zone?
Yes, so it is vague because it's yeah, because you have to accommodate for the whole journey. So as a team, you have to define what that unprofitable zone means to you. For some teams, it's much more sensitive than for other teams. For example, there's also the fact that you are forecasting what the lifetime value is going to be as you're making this decision as well, of what my unprofitable zone is. So the fact that players are spending over time means that, if I expect a player to eventually spend on average $5 throughout their whole lifetime, those $5 might come over the course of a year. Versus I'm not expecting it will all come, when I release the game and everyone spends their $5. So part of kind of that vagueness and kind of that being a range is that you're slowly getting players into the game day over day, and they're slowly spending. So there's not only different player demographics and how much they're willing to spend, but there's also different players at different stages in their life in the game. So a player, you might have an audience that has, 50% of your players have been around for a year. The other 50% have joined in the last 30 days. And what part of that journey of the game they're in, it's going to look different based on when they started playing as well.
Interesting. You're really designing an open-ended environment to keep them in, and that environment will look very different, like based on the player themselves. That's fascinating. Okay, well, thank you, Tammy, so much for such a great talk, and thank you to our participants for their questions. Next Tuesday and Wednesday, we'll be at the HDSI annual conference here on campus. And also live streaming. I see Sarah has put in the website, hdsiconference.org. It's free to attend and open to the public, so we hope you'll join us. But otherwise, thank you so much. I am going to call this session to a close. Thanks, everyone.